August 23rd, and I am giving you the 6 month recap. And it's hard to believe that we are 6 months since the invasion in February, the invasion of Ukraine. I never thought I would be sitting here doing this 6 months later. When the war first hit, we're thinking, oh no, this is really bad. And this is just a testament to the strength of Ukrainians, their indomitable spirit. What I'm going to do, and by the way, if you don't know me, my name is Darren. I'm just a professor at an American university. I'm American. I'm not Ukrainian. I'm just watching this and trying to understand and help others understand. And if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe. I do these daily, and I never thought I'd be saying that 6 months later, that I'm doing these videos, these updates daily. Okay. So here's where I want to start, and I just wanted to look at the headline of this, and then I'm going to go through about a dozen articles. 6 months into the Russia-Ukrainian war, the entire world is losing. I think that's pretty fair. A look at where we go from here. Now, where do we go from here? There's an interview, A War of Independence, 6 months into the Russian invasion. A Ukrainian historian takes stock, and so we know what happened on February 24th. On August 24th, Ukrainians will celebrate Independence Day, and we're just on the cusp of this, and we're just wrapping up 6 months of this war. 2 weeks after the invasion began on February 24th, it was already clear that it was going to be a long war. I didn't think so. I looked at it and I was thinking, oh no, this is bad. 3-1 odds. What? And when Zelensky said, I need ammunition, not a ride, I was like, whoa, who's this guy? Because I wasn't paying attention to this. And then I ultimately wrote a book about Zelensky, and he's a fascinating figure. 3 decades following the fall of the Soviet Union have shown that Ukraine and Russia are different, not because of the language, and there is a language difference I've discovered over time, and not because of culture, but because of political traditions. And this is really interesting. So that the perception of the relationship between the state and society, to put it bluntly, you can hardly imagine the victory of a leader like Putin in Ukraine, and you can hardly imagine the victory of a revolution such as the Orange Revolution in Russia. That's really, really fascinating. These are different people. And I've met Ukrainians before, and they were like really proud to be Ukrainian, and I didn't understand why. But they're really different, and they're really proud. This wasn't I'm not casting stones. Well, I don't understand. I just didn't understand it. But they justifiably should be very proud right now. Ukrainian independence came as a result of compromise of three unlikely actors, very, very unlikely allies. The National Communists, they wanted to stay in power, and then there was the nationalistic, inclined Western Ukrainian elites, and they wanted kind of a Ukraine nation, and then the Donbas miners' strike movement, and these three groups worked together for independence. And then right after the proclamation of independence, they kind of became competitors, or not so much allies anymore. So in 2014, at the time of the Euromaidan, the annex of Crimea and the beginning of the war in Donbass, the Lviv, Kiev, Dnipro axis was the backbone of statehood. So the most nationalistic factor was kind of the core. Before the war, Odessa and Kharkiv were considered not fully reliable, even on the edge of pro-Russian sentiment. Okay, and we know where those are now on the map. I mean, I understand the map of Ukraine almost as well as I understand the map of my home state in the United States now. The first is the ethnicization of Ukraine. So what kind of Ukraine will emerge from this? A very pro-ethnically Ukrainian Ukraine, very much like the case after Israel after the 1973 war. Putin himself said he's waging a war not against Ukraine but against the West on Ukrainian territory. Ukraine is a testing ground for the stability of two competing political models of our era. Will liberal democracy survive, or authoritarianism? The dominant position of Ukrainian society is that it won't accept any territorial concessions, and it wants to come back to 1991. And they added here, and I thought this was really interesting, Zelensky understands that if he makes concessions, he could lose power. Now, I don't think that that's his motivation, like that's driving him, but I think he understands that that's probably the reality. This is a war of attrition, so the results depend very much on the resistance of Ukrainian society. And the United States Pentagon officials about a week ago said on a scale of 1 to 10, the Ukrainians are a 12 in how they've handled their military. So I think they're going to resist quite a bit longer. Okay, here's another article. This is Hard-Won Unity. Polls show that Russian invasion is transforming Ukrainian self-identity. Now, Putin entered this war going, we have all these pro-Russian sympathizers, particularly in the East. We'll come in, we'll be hailed as victors, and they'll throw roses at us, and it'll be easy. We'll be over in a couple weeks. Didn't work out that way. In fact, it converted this society into something so like, look at the flag. I mean, this is a great metaphor. So anti-Russian, with generational hatred, and they were, if they were trying to keep ground out of NATO, Finland and Sweden just went into NATO, and that's I think a larger landmass than Ukraine. So it's not working so well for Putin. Here's some more evidence. Ukrainians are united like never before, but it's a hard-won unity. The historic 85% Ukrainians identify themselves above all as citizens of Ukraine. That is as opposed to regions, residents of the regions, representatives of an ethnic minority, some other identifier. So this is called an indicator of civil identity. So it's 85% now. A half a year ago, remember, early February, January, it would have been 64.4%. So that's a significant shift. Nothing could have had such a unifying effect as the war waged by Putin and his cynical justification of it. As many as 96% of Ukrainians support their country joining the European Union, and 91% now favor joining NATO. Some 92% profess a bad attitude toward Russia. Well, there's probably a reason for that. Only 2% declare a good one, and those numbers were like 20% higher 6 months ago, maybe more than that. There was a good fifth of the country that was kind of happy-ish with Russia once upon a time. The Ukrainian armed forces and Volodymyr Zelensky enjoy record high confidence. So the armed forces and Zelensky. As many as 97% of Ukrainians trust or completely trust the armed forces, and 85% trust or completely trust the latter. And I've seen polls as high as 93% for Zelensky. Okay, 6 months into the large-scale war with Russia, 40% of Ukrainians believe the situation is improving. 29% believe in some ways it's improving. So that's a good chunk. 40 and 30, that's 70% believe it's getting better, while 22% believe things are getting worse. So that's what's going on the ground. That's their perspective. Okay, again, these articles came from Radio Free Europe. 6 months and counting, 5 things to watch as we go into this. So this is a conversation with military expert Lawrence Friedman. Concluded that it feels like there's 2 punch-drunk boxers trading jabs and uppercuts, yet unable to land a knockout blow. And that's kind of where we are. It is, I mean, somebody's got to have some kind of definitive ending to this. In the next 6 months, the war is likely to enter a simmering phase with military and economic attrition draining both sides. So, who can survive or who can last longer? Well, the 5 things to watch for. First, it's the economy, stupid. If you're Ukrainian, not American, it's the economy, stupid was a slogan of an American political president's campaign. Within the campaign, Clinton's campaign many years ago. But the point is this: it's the economy. Watch the economy. Russia's economy is projected to contract by 4.2% this year, with 13% inflation, and it's far worse in Ukraine. Ukraine's economy wrecked by Russian attacks. You keep getting things blown up by missiles. Ukraine's GDP could shrink as much as half, and it's already not huge to begin with. The government budget deficit reached $4 billion in May and climbed to $6 billion in June. The rebuilding of the country will cost $750 billion, and it's hard to even wrap your mind around those kind of figures. Winter is coming, and Putin, I think, thinks that winter is his friend. Here's why. Several European countries face potentially dire circumstances with energy, gas, and particularly natural gas that they would have gotten from Europe. Germany's even contemplating restarting its nuclear generating plants. All politics is local. This is the next factor. Prior to the invasion, Zelensky won the Ukrainian presidency, but he was suffering from sagging ratings. Like he had like a 25% approval rating. Since the invasion, he is at 85%. And as I said earlier, I've seen polls as high as 93%. This is genuine support based on policy, courage, ability to marshal Western support, especially the deliverment of arms. Ukrainians will eventually get impatient, however. Now, so that's right. They're going to get impatient if it just keeps dragging on. How long? Like we don't know which side can outlast the other. For Putin, it's a different calculus. Even before the invasion, the Kremlin had begun gradually stifling Russian civil society. They become more and more authoritarian. Independent media and political dissident. You can get 15 years in jail for speaking against this special military operation. Even not using the term special military operation can get you a fine. Okay, so they're slipping toward outright authoritarianism. Now, how long can the West hang on as well? In Germany, Schultz has seen his popularity slip. In Britain, Boris Johnson was just ousted. In the United States, it's going to be a rough election for Joe Biden, the midterm election. He'll be in power for another 2 years after November, but he's probably going to lose he's definitely going to lose the House. He's probably going to lose the Senate. But that's not because of Ukraine. That's just because of American politics. Joe Biden's popularity has cratered in large part due to Americans' dissatisfaction with record high inflation, car fuel prices, other things along those lines. But even if Republicans take control of Congress, strong support in Ukraine is likely to continue. And if you're Ukrainian, I want you to understand the American perspective. I happen to be a conservative Republican. Conservative Republicans are just as behind Ukraine as liberal Democrats are. So we're all on the same team here as far as Ukraine goes. Peace without victory, who will win? Well, it's a question of how you define what winning looks like. What does winning look like? Russia is struggling with a personnel issue, like trying to replenish their ranks. Ukraine, the answer is retaining control of the entire Donbass and eventually Crimea. That's what victory looks like to them. But Russia, they started off talking about demilitarization and denazification, and then they were claiming something about Russian genocide. And then Putin also framed this as a war between Russia and the West fought on Ukrainian land. So Friedman, the emeritus professor of war studies at King College, said this: the Russian military position is deteriorating. The West's backing for Ukraine has yet to slacken. The trends, therefore, favor Ukraine. The Kremlin will have to work out how long they can continue to pretend that they have a credible path to victory. And I hope he's right. I think he's right. I think this is just Putin miscalculated in the worst possible way, and it's coming back to haunt him. Okay, Zelensky vows to get Crimea back under Ukraine's control. This is again Radio Free Europe. Crimea was and is Ukraine. Now, as far as Ukraine is concerned, the nation of Ukraine, that is absolutely correct. Hasn't always been. Ukraine hasn't always been Ukraine. It hasn't always been Russia. It hasn't always been any of them. It was taken over by different. I mean, it depends on when you look into history. But as far as the nation of Ukraine is concerned, that makes sense. Okay, Russia took control of Crimea and Ukraine in March 2014 following the overthrow of Kremlin-leaning President Viktor Yanukovych. A month earlier, Moscow sought to legitimize an annex with a staged referendum dismissed as illegal by at least 100 countries. There's only like 190 countries in the world, and 100 countries are saying, no, that's illegal. Why? Well, they had a 97% vote to leave Ukraine. Okay, if you're in the West, you know that nobody gets a 97% vote. Getting more than 60% in a U.S. presidential election only happened twice, and that was with Nixon and one other president, I think Johnson. Anyway, and that was, if it was Johnson, it was just after Kennedy's assassination. I don't remember who else, but like 2 U.S. presidents. So it was fake. Russia launched at least 750 cruise missile strikes from Crimea, and so to leave Crimea as Russia is just it's an intolerable situation for Ukrainians. Okay, at the same time, here's RT. This is Russia Today. You can watch this live if you go to RT.com, and I urge you to do that only to see how strange it is when they offer the same their vantage point or their viewpoint of the same events. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky announced on Tuesday that Ukraine will take Russian territory of Crimea by military force if necessary and without consulting any country, including Kyiv's Western backers. Well, Kyiv's Western backers are actually behind him on that. Speaking at the so-called Crimean Platform, a Ukrainian organized gathering of 60 nations and international organizations that back Kyiv's claim of sovereignty over Crimea, Zelensky said Ukraine is strong and powerful enough to make Ukraine Crimea a reality. We will return Crimea by any means necessary that we can consider correct without consulting other countries, he said. Considered Russian land since imperial times. Now, that's true. It was. It was Novorossiya under Catherine the Great. Crimea was an autonomous republic within the Soviet Union that the Soviet Union then starved. Now, here's what they're not saying. Like, the Russians say, well, it's part of our country, but they treated them so terribly that they don't want to be part of this anymore. And this is what the Baltic states and Poland spent $3 trillion on Ukraine. $3 trillion. The Baltic states have been the most ardent supporters, and they're there because they understand what Soviet domination of their countries were like, and that is why they don't want to be part of it anymore. Crimea was an autonomous republic of the Soviet Union until it was appended from the Ukrainian SSR by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in 1954, and that's true. Khrushchev gave it over, and there was no reason to think it was a problem because it was all part of the Soviet sphere. But when they broke up in 1991, it went with Ukraine. It was part of Ukraine. The U.S.-led NATO alliance considers Crimea to be illegally annexed. It was illegally annexed. With its forces tied up fighting Russian and allied troops in Donbass, Ukraine has relied on drones to carry out its sporadic attacks, and they're getting more drones. Hold on. Zelensky ruled out the prospect of a ceasefire, telling the summit that Ukraine would not freeze the current front line to calm down Russia. Why? Why should they? Because Russia's going to just regroup and then invade again, as far as Ukraine can tell. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accusing Western governments of keeping Ukraine from any constructive steps toward peace settlement. I don't think the Western governments have to do it. The Ukrainian authorities are very, very concerned that this never happen again. It's not the West that's driving it. It's the Ukrainians themselves. Okay, another article, 6-month mark. This kind of gives you some insight into what's going on. As you know, Alexander Dugans' daughter was blown up just a couple of days ago in a car bomb that was probably meant for him, not her, but nonetheless. Ukraine's speed at solving the car bomb assassination was way too speedy. Like, what was going on? Like, how did that happen? It's attracted skepticism. I talked about it over the last 2 days, and I'm not convinced that they've actually figured out who it was. That's like way too quick. The FSB does not have a reputation for solving political killings quickly or for telling the truth. It's more for telling the truth that I had issues with. The FSB's version raises some potentially embarrassing questions. How did they let the Ukrainian citizen in and out? I mean, she's a Azov fighter, apparently, is what they are saying. They check at the gates. They check as they go into the country and check as they go out. Why would they target the Dugans? So some observers are now saying that it's probably infighting within the Russian ranks, between a struggle between the peacemakers and the hawks, and Dugan is one of the hawks. Dugan is not a nice guy, by the way. Dugan is a far right, and I hate the term far right because far right means something different in the United States than it does in Russia. It's very different. Dugan is a far right author, a former professor and ideologue who helped sow the seeds of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He called for the creation of an authoritarian Eurasian state, incorporating Ukraine, that is, absorbing Ukraine into Russia. His neo-Eurasianist movement has been described by political scientists as fascist, and Dugan has repeatedly espoused violence. So he espoused violence for Ukraine, and his daughter was just blown up. And I mean, you kind of live by the sword, die by the sword is what's going on. In 2014, Dugin told the Russian state television that Ukrainians need to be killed, killed, killed. So again, not a great guy. He warned at the time that the war with Ukraine is inevitable. Either we start to fight now or we shall have to fight later. And so here, this another political analyst and Kremlin critic called the murder of Dugina, that's her, called her murder a warning to the Russia by the Russian security services to her father for his criticism of Putin. That's a different take. And he described the FSB claim that this other person that they fingered for the murder was a monstrous in his self-revealing stupidity. And I think that's right, because I don't trust it, and I barely understand what's going on. I mean, I only know what I get from the news. Okay, let me turn my attention to the Institute for the Study of War, because this is really interesting as well. This shows you where we are in 6 months, and what's going on, and the enormity and the monstrosity of all this. So Russian government sources confirm that Russia is bringing Ukrainian children to Russia and having Russian families adopt them. So Ukraine has a credible claim that there's this like Ukrainian genocide, like you're trying to wipe out our culture. Over 1,000 children from Mariupol have been adopted by these Russian authorities and placed in homes already. Russian authorities are deploying beyond that, are deploying security forces to Luhansk Oblast, likely in response to waning support for the war and growing unwillingness to fight among the Luhansk residents. Okay, so the Luhansk People's Republic fought into Severodonetsk and into Lysychansk, and then they kind of just went, look, we don't want to go past our republic, our borders, right? We don't want to continue to fight and take this other ground. And they were fed into a wood chipper. It was terrible for them. Their casualty rate was unbelievable, and they're now resisting. Security deputies in occupied Luhansk Oblast diverts these forces from. So if Russians have to go somewhere else, then it diverts these forces from operations elsewhere in Ukraine, which is also likely contributing, they say, to broader Russian failure to translate limited tactical gains into operational success. Okay. Russian officials may have, now this is really interesting, they may have conducted a false flag event in Donetsk city on August 23rd to justify attacks against Ukrainian government buildings the next day, because it's about to be Independence Day, and so I was like, what? And so I was looking this up. Yeah, there was a Ukrainian strike on the administration headquarters in Donetsk. This is where Denis Pushlin, the head of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, is, and so there was a strike, and it would look like a Ukrainian strike. It would be a legitimate Ukrainian target, but they're saying that this administrative building where Pushlin works, it may have been a false flag operation to kind of rile up the Donetsk People's Republic. And the Russians have done other false flag operations before. It's not any surprise. Unverifiable sources reported that Axis commanders in Ukraine are reportedly directing Russian President Vladimir Putin directly to him. Now they're reporting from Donetsk, from the Donbass, directly to Putin. That tells you that he's worried that something's gone wrong, and so that's all I wanted to show with that. Okay, a couple more articles and we'll be done. Ukraine, we already talked about that. The U.S. is to supply Ukraine with 10 Switchblade 600 kamikaze drones. The attacks in Crimea have been these drone strikes. So if they can supply, and now they'll use them in Donbass, they'll use them in Kherson, but supplying more of these is a sign of more to come. When on Naval Day you had that first drone strike, I predicted then you're going to see a lot more of that. They have these loitering munitions. What that means is they have the capacity to provide reconnaissance. They can fly around, and then they can just dive bomb and actually strike, and like a kamikaze, like just strike and blow up. Loitering munitions means that the system itself is the payload. A number of smaller, shorter-range Switchblade 300 variant and the Phoenix Ghost. According to the manufacturer, 300 variant weighs 5.5 pounds, can fly 10 kilometers, loiter 15 minutes, while the 120-pound version can fly 40 kilometers and loiter in the air for about 40 minutes, finding its target and then kind of just descending and blowing things up. So that's on the way, but it's a contract. They have to build these and then ship them over. So it may take a little while. Okay, in the meantime, the full-scale war in 6 months now has cost Ukraine 1 trillion UAH, hryvnia, I think is how you pronounce their equivalent of a dollar, what their currency is. 1 trillion. Okay, now what does that mean? So a trillion hryvnia is 27 billion US dollars. There's an exchange rate, right? 27 billion dollars is the cost. Now, the US is about to give another $3 billion, and the US has already spent $10 trillion, or I'm sorry, not 10 trillion, $10 billion on aid to Ukraine. They're about to do, and I mean, the foreign aid. Let me go back here. The movement of 14 billion of external funding. That's foreign aid. The U.S. accounts for about 10 of that. Poland is about is good 2 to 3 billion of that. Poland has been like a great friend of Ukraine. Okay, and so the U.S. is about to spend another 3 billion. That is another 110 billion hryvnia. Okay, and that's where we are at the 6 month mark. I generally end these with some Pravda or RT, and I'm going to do that today because Medvedev, this is the former president of Russia, said that here's why Ukraine loses its chance to join NATO. Dmitry Medvedev said it's clear to everyone that no neighbors can give it, that's Ukraine, any guarantees, even if they hate Russia fiercely, and no one will accept Ukraine in NATO. And this is a direct result of a special military operation. What? No, they're actually going into the arms of NATO because of the special military operation, as they are into the arms of the EU as well. Security guarantees could only be given by an agreement with Russia. Well, you had an agreement with Russia with security guarantees in the Budapest Memorandum in 1994 when Ukraine gave up its nukes, and the US, the UK, and Russia guaranteed its borders. And Russia has been the aggressor ever since. All right, that's all that I have. If you are listening at this point, please subscribe because I'm going to be doing this. I don't know how long. I'm trying to do this as long as I can, and keep watching. I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully, it will be a peaceful day tomorrow. Have a good one.